Have you ever noticed that the harder you try to be nicer, the less people seem to respect you? If that's been your experience, and I know it has for so many of you watching, I need you to understand that it is not you. The problem is that you've been greatly misinformed because right now, dark feminine energy is one of the most misunderstood concepts out there. And if you're a woman who wants respect, choice, and leverage in her life, you can't afford to misunderstand it. This is video one in the Fundamentals of Dark Feminine Energy series. We're starting with the core definition and the why behind it. Most of what we see online about dark feminine energy isn't actually grounded. It's often taught by people who are still operating from unresolved trauma, performing confidence, reacting emotionally, or repeating surface level ideas without real mastery. Real dark feminine energy has nothing to do with manipulation. It has nothing to do with aesthetics, and it definitely has nothing to do with being toxic. It comes down to one word, and that is restraint. The moment you understand this, everything, and I mean everything, will change for you. I'm talking your relationships, your career, the entire power dynamic shifts. By the end of this video, you will understand why some women are just naturally prioritized, respected, and highly desired. They don't chase, they don't over explain, and they don't have to prove a single thing. Let's start by defining what dark feminine energy actually is. First, we need to clear up what the word dark means. When you hear the word dark, what's the first thing that comes to mind? When most people hear the word dark, they immediately associate it with scary things, right? Like evil, Halloween, immorality, witchcraft, something basically like wrong things. But dark in this context has nothing to do with morality. It refers to exiled power, the parts of your natural feminine strength that were suppressed, shamed, or pushed underground. Because a woman who fully owns these parts of herself is inconvenient. These are the parts of you that learned very early that if you were too quiet, you were seen as rude, maybe. If you were too detached, you were cold. If you're selective, then you're stuck up. And let's say you're a woman who genuinely enjoys focusing on herself, bettering herself, striving for more. You are a high achiever. Or, God forbid, you say out loud that right now your priority is your career, not becoming a wife or a mother. That desire alone can start to feel like a sin because of how quickly someone is ready to label you selfish. Personally, I believe this is a path every woman should walk before devoting herself to becoming a wife or a mother. This, right here, is a part of developing your dark feminine energy. Now, if you want me to go deeper on that, let me know in the comments and I'll make a full video on it. Anyway, let's get back to this. So, what were you, as a woman, actually rewarded for? Agreeableness, constant accessibility, boundless emotional availability, endless understanding, relentless flexibility. You were taught to bend, to fold, to be the appointed emotional support human, on call for free at that. And when you even hinted at stepping out of that role, you were punished. Sometimes it was subtle, a withdrawal of affection, maybe, a shift in tone. Maybe they become distant. Other times it was direct, whether it was criticism, shame, or confrontation. And it was consistent. This is true whether you experienced it in later romantic relationships or growing up with your parents. So many of us were conditioned early on to become chronic people pleasers inside our own family systems. We were punished for having boundaries, for saying no without a 5-page essay of justification, for not reacting when someone tried to bait us, for choosing ourselves and not feeling an ounce of guilt about it. That punishment, that's what created the shadow. And that shadow is a reservoir of suppressed instinct, unexpressed sacred rage, and policed desire. That's where your dark feminine energy has been waiting. It's been waiting for you to reclaim those exiled parts of yourself, to develop the ability to hold yourself, to know when to withhold without hostility, without explanation, and without guilt. And that is what I mean when I talk about dark feminine energy. If you search what is dark feminine energy on TikTok, you'll notice that most of the advice centers around reaction and theatrics. Now, look, reaction can feel powerful in the moment. It's that adrenaline rush of the flawless clapback. It's that surge you feel when posting a vague fire story after a fight with someone. But the truth is, reaction means you are still on their hook. If your power only shows up in response to their behavior, to their texts, to them being silent, or to their disrespect, then they're setting the tempo and you're really just playing along. Think about traffic. Two people get cut off. The first one completely loses it. They're honking, screaming, tailgating. Their whole body is tense, heart racing, hands gripping the wheel like they're about to explode. Yes, they are completely gone and consumed by the person who cut them off. I've literally seen two cars pull over on the side of the road because of this. Two grown men got out of their vehicles and literally started fist fighting on the side of the road. I wish I was joking. Okay, so now think of the second person, okay? They get cut off and they take a breath. Their hands stay relaxed on the wheel. They might even smile a little. Then they just change lanes to create space. They're not ignoring what just happened, they're regulating their response to it. We need to remain aware that we are living in a time where people are very unhinged, hence the two men on the side of the road ordeal. Road rage can turn deadly. You don't know who's carrying what in their car. You don't know who's one bad moment away from snapping. They literally made a Netflix movie about this too. And no, it wasn't exaggerated. It was inspired by real events. So there's power in your regulated response, is what I'm saying. It is one of the highest forms of self-preservation. So which driver is in control here? Not of the other car, but of their own vehicle, their own nervous system, their own day. The first driver is in reaction. The second driver is in regulation. And regulation is the foundation of real dark feminine power. Now let's shift the thinking to dating. This is what reaction looks like in dating. You see he's online, but he hasn't texted you back. And you tell yourself, maybe he didn't see my message. And let's be honest, he saw it. Okay? He saw it, girl. So you send another text. Some time passes by, and he still hasn't responded. Then you see he's online again. Now you're irritated. You call your girlfriend, you explain the situation, and somehow she talks you into posting a thirst trap of some sort, or like an angry subliminal quote that you know he'll recognize. You're fully aware this goes against your values and is not aligned with the woman you're becoming, but you post it anyway. Now, moments later, you notice he's watched your story, but still no reply, no reaction, and still no text back. But what has happened is this: you've just fed his ego. Now he's thinking, wow, look at how I have this beautiful woman acting over me. And now you're hot, you're emotional, and you're typing up paragraphs at 2 o'clock in the morning trying to explain your worth to someone who hasn't even replied yet. Now, this is what a regulated response would look like. You notice he's pulling back, and you quietly pull back further. You don't post for him. You don't text him for clarity. You don't chase a reaction. You simply redirect your energy. And trust me, men can feel this. They can feel when your energy is no longer oriented toward them. So now you go to the gym. You put that energy into a project, open up your laptop, call a friend. You become a calm, deep lake. One that if he throws stones into, there's barely any ripples. That's how calm you are. Okay, just imagine you're like a lake, but a very calm, deep lake. That is the difference. One response is chaotic and the other is rooted. This is the distinction most women miss. Being loud does not assert dominance. If anything, it does the exact opposite and it makes you look weak. Over explaining isn't confidence, it's your anxiety of needing to be seen. Emotional intensity is not strength, it's pain that hasn't been processed yet. If your sense of power disappears the moment you feel triggered, collapses the moment someone pushes back, or needs to be performed to feel real, then it's not power, it's adrenaline. And adrenaline always crashes. Dark feminine energy is the opposite of the crash. It's the ability to hold, to contain yourself emotionally, energetically, and socially without leaking your focus, your peace, or your worth into the void of someone else's behavior. Now, I'm not telling you to become like stone, right? I do want you to envision, though, being deep water. When I talk about feminine energy, dark feminine energy, really any form of feminine energy, I love comparing it to water, right? Because water is inherently feminine. Now, you can't see the bottom. You can't create large ripples by throwing a pebble into it. And you have currents beneath the surface that move entirely on your own terms. That is the foundation of real power, total energetic containment. Now, when that container has leaks, that's what drains women. It's not from being too soft or too kind or being too feminine. It's that slow drip of your energy when you over explain, overgive, or overshare. That leaves you empty. And what you're left with is pure depletion. So, at its core, real dark feminine energy is not an aesthetic, it's a state of being built on these three qualities. The first quality is self command. Self command means your inner state leads, not the chaos around you. In any situation, you should always be the constant, never the variable. You don't negotiate from a place of panic. You don't make decisions from a place of lack. And a woman in command of herself doesn't need consensus to trust her no. She doesn't need a committee to approve her yes. Her ability to control herself is what shifts the power dynamic in any situation. The second quality is discernment. And this is where a lot of us ladies get uncomfortable because discernment means not everyone gets a first class flight into your inner world. Not everyone gets your emotional labor, your vulnerability, your midnight thoughts, even your benefit of the doubt. And I know we women, we love giving people the benefit of the doubt. We're wired that way. We want to see the good in people. But the sooner you accept that not everyone has good intentions, okay, or even understands how to handle access to you, the better you get at self preservation. And this is why I love dark feminine energy because it teaches self preservation without emotional shutdown. It allows you to be selective without becoming closed off. So, discernment means you observe first. You listen to what people do, not just what they say. Let me say that again. You listen to what they do, not just what they say. Scripture says this perfectly. You will know them by their fruits, meaning You know a person by their actions, by what they consistently produce. Do they produce peace or confusion, clarity or anxiety, humility or a need for control? How do they treat people they don't need anything from? Those answers will tell you far more about someone than anything they say about themselves. Which is why the saying exists, talk is cheap. And once you start observing this way, you realize that your energy is the most precious currency you have. This is why women who embody discernment are often called hard to read. They're not playing games, they're not withholding to manipulate, they're just reading the room and taking their time before they engage. And the third quality, the one most people underestimate, is restraint. There goes that word again. Restraint is not suppression. Suppression is fear. Restraint is choice. It's the space between the trigger and your response. The half-second pause is where your power lives. It means you could react, but you let the silence speak instead. You could over-explain, but you let their question just hang in the air. You could chase for closure, but you understand that sometimes walking away is the loudest answer you can give. Dark feminine energy understands that a woman who can regulate her impulses controls the moment. She doesn't need to raise her voice. People just naturally lean in when she speaks because she's not leaking energy. She's contained, and contained power is magnetic. So understand this. Restraint changes how you respond and it reorganizes everything around you. Once you really grasp this, it becomes painfully clear why the opposite approach, this constant pressure to be nice, doesn't work. Doesn't work. In fact, it often does the exact opposite. So let's talk about that next. Because so many women were conditioned to give away their leverage without ever realizing they were holding it. Before we dive into it, understand that this is not intended to blame women. You didn't become this overly nice girl because you're weak. And it's not just how you are. Okay, so stop telling yourself that. The truth is you were conditioned into being this way. See, most women were taught that niceness equals safety. If you're pleasant enough, understanding enough, accommodating enough, you'll be liked, chosen, protected, or all three. And for a long time, that approach actually worked, especially for women in a very different time, like in the 1950s. The distinction most women never make is that kindness is a virtue and niceness is a strategy. And strategies are meant to get you something. This is why excessive niceness often feels off to people, not consciously, but subconsciously. On an energetic level, it feels like you're seeking something from them, even if that's not your intention. Being kind comes from wholeness. Being nice comes from fear, fear of conflict, of rejection, fear of being misunderstood or being seen as difficult. So instead of being honest, direct, and holding your ground, you tend to smooth things out over because you're afraid of ruffling feathers. You get softer, you tend to overextend yourself. And this is where burnout, aka the big drain, as I like to call it, starts. Because what looks like kindness on the surface is often self abandonment underneath. Dark feminine energy teaches you how to be comfortable in the uncomfortable. It makes you unafraid of killing the vibe, of being the so called party pooper. I remember a job I used to work at. I was friendly with a group of girls there. At the time, I liked wearing glasses, the ones that look like prescription glasses, but they're not prescription, they're just for fashion. Okay. One of the girls in the group already knew this because she had asked me privately before more than once, and I told her every time they weren't prescription. One day, in front of the whole group, she suddenly blurts out, "Are those real?" And her tone made it obvious that she was trying to embarrass me. So a few of the girls started giggling, and I looked at her and said, "Didn't you ask me that already? And didn't I tell you no each time? Are you trying to be like funny or something?" And she froze because people aren't used to being called out like that, right? Especially in a calm manner. She didn't know what to say. Now, the old version of me would have laughed it off. I would have worried about seeming stuck up or killing the vibe, but I didn't. I let the moment be awkward. I let everyone sit in it, and I was completely okay with that. Now, some people might say, "Oh, it's not that big of a deal," but it actually is because it's in these small moments, especially when an audience is present, that people test what they can get away with. And if you don't address it early, it quietly sets a precedent. This is why there's always that one person in the friend group who becomes the butt of the jokes, the one who's subtly disrespected more than everyone else. That dynamic doesn't come out of nowhere. It starts with small moments like this, moments of unchecked disrespect. And once you notice this, you'll start seeing it everywhere, especially in dating. Here's some examples of what it looks like in real life. This shows up as over texting, sending the follow up message you didn't need to send, explaining yourself again, just in case. It shows up as over apologizing, saying sorry for having needs, sorry for taking up space, sorry for reacting to something that was actually disrespectful. It shows up as over explaining your boundaries, trying to make them sound nicer, more reasonable, more palatable. And one of the biggest ones, absorbing awkwardness and disrespect. You laugh it off, you minimize it, you take responsibility for other people's discomfort because somewhere along the way you learned that peace meant keeping things smooth, even if it came at your own expense. Now, what I'm about to say might sting at first, but it's actually liberating, okay? Overgiving will not make people appreciate you. All it's going to do is train entitlement. When people get used to you overfunctioning, they don't experience it as generosity. They experience it as normal. So when you finally pull back, when you finally say no and stop explaining, they're confused, they're uncomfortable. They might even accuse you of changing as if that's such a bad thing, right? And you didn't change. You just stopped overcompensating. This is why so many women feel drained. There's a saying in the business world, under promise and over deliver. And honestly, I feel this applies to every area of life. When you leave room instead of making promises, you preserve your power. Because when you choose to give freely, it's received as generosity. But when you promise and then pull back, it's received as inconsistency. Even if you've shown up for them 100 times before. One no feels bigger to people than 100 yeses. And that's just human psychology. Now, when you start pulling back and not being so giving, the people who benefited from you being that way may get upset. That's normal. The way through this is learning how to stay unbothered. And being unbothered doesn't mean being cold. You might feel some inner resistance at first. That's just your shedding, okay? You're shedding an old identity. Let that happen. People adjust once you stand firm. Not taking things personally doesn't mean you don't care. And having boundaries doesn't make you harsh. It means you're no longer available for self abandonment. When you stop trying to manage other people's reactions, you free up an enormous amount of energy. When you stop performing niceness as a strategy, your entire presence changes. People either rise or they remove themselves, and both outcomes is a win. So understand that dark feminine energy doesn't ask you to stop being kind. It asks you to stop abandoning yourself in the name of being liked. And once you see this, you can't unsee it. Now, let's zoom out a bit because dark feminine energy isn't just a tactic you switch on for dates and switch off afterward. Think of it as an operating system you're installing into your new identity. Once it's running, it recalibrates everything: your relationships, marriage, your career, your business, even the way you move through the world. Let's start where most women feel the deepest frustration: dating. Imagine you meeting someone, there's a spark between you two. So you start chatting and getting to know one another, but within a week, you notice you're the one double texting or doing the heavy lifting in the conversation. You find yourself crafting thoughtful replies to his one word responses. You're pretty much carrying the conversation for two people, trying to keep it alive. That frantic energy is the old operating system. It's the part of you that thinks, maybe if I just keep things flowing, it'll work itself out. Now, let's look at the same scenario with your dark feminine energy activated. You meet someone, there's a spark, but you don't rush to fill the silence. You don't perform, you simply respond. Not to his potential, but to how he shows up from moment to moment. If he pulls back, you don't chase. You become quietly, gracefully occupied. You don't send the, hey, hope you're having a great week text just to remind him you exist. You don't explain why you're busy. You just are busy, living a life he might get the privilege to join. You don't fish for reassurance. Your peace isn't something he can grant or take away. You're not playing hard to get, you see. You actually are hard to get. Now, let's talk about what dark feminine energy looks like in marriage and long term relationships. In marriage, your dark feminine energy shouldn't disappear. If anything, you should turn it up a notch. It should be part of the foundation of the relationship. Have you ever met a couple that's been together for decades? I'm talking like 30 years or more. And the husband is still completely smitten by the wife. They act like newlyweds still after all of those years. Like if they didn't tell you how long they'd been together, you'd assume they just got together. And that's not an accident. In almost every case, the woman never abandoned herself. She never collapsed into routine. She never lost her sense of mystery, self possession, or inner life. That's dark feminine energy. And it is intoxicating to our partners. It's what keeps a long term relationship feeling alive, fresh, and fun. The woman stays connected to herself, and that's what keeps the connection between them strong. Let's take a look at a scenario. He's distant, stressed, checked out, and constantly on his phone. You ask, what's wrong? He says, nothing. You ask again, softer this time, same answer. So you try to fix it. You manage his mood, you absorb the tension in the room because the discomfort makes you anxious. That's the nice reflex. It feels like love, but it's actually anxiety. Now, the dark feminine shift. He's distant. You notice. You don't internalize it. You don't make it your project, you give it space. You might say, I'm here if you want to talk. And then you literally go do something else. Read your book, go work on a project, take a bath. You don't nag, you don't chase, you don't turn yourself into an emotional detective trying to solve the mystery of his mood. And don't confuse this with being cold. What you're actually communicating is, hey, grown woman over here, I can hold myself. You're not collapsing into his emotional space. And that gives him the room to rise without you having to drag him there. What it really comes down to is saying less and doing less with intention. Here's some more examples of what that actually looks like. Setting a boundary without a long explanation. If he's talking to you crazy, you simply say, I won't be spoken to that way, and then leave the room. Not over functioning. Let's say he forgets to handle something he already knows is his responsibility. Your instinct might be to remind him, or jump in, or just do it yourself so it doesn't become a thing. But instead, you don't rescue him from the consequences. For example, if taking out the trash is his job, you don't remind him, you don't nag, you don't do it for him while feeling annoyed. You let the trash sit there. Yes, even when it starts getting a little funky. And eventually, he will notice. And you didn't have to lecture him about a thing because the natural consequences did the work for you. Remember, you're not his mom. You don't need to teach him lessons. And lastly, holding your own center. You can be loving, warm, and connected without merging or losing yourself in the relationship. The most powerful thing you can do in a marriage or a long term relationship is often nothing, not a passive nothing. You should be deeply rooted in a calm presence. Your energy should say, I am here, I am whole, and I am not afraid of your silence, your mood swings, or your withdrawal. That type of calm firmness is magnetic. It'll either pull him back towards connection or it'll reveal that the connection was you carrying the weight all along. And both outcomes brings you clarity. So whether you're on a first date or in a decade-long marriage, the principle is the same. Stop managing, start being. Stop leaking energy into someone else's mood or potential. Stay rooted in yourself and let people meet you there. And honestly, this was even more obvious for me in business. Work, business, and your career are actually where dark feminine energy becomes essential if you want to truly thrive. Success requires strategic communication, and communication isn't just what you say, it's your body language, your pacing, your capacity to hold yourself in the room. When dark feminine energy leads how you communicate in your career, things shift. You stop over explaining your ideas, and people perceive you as more competent. You stop softening your words so no one feels intimidated. You stop feeling silence because you're uncomfortable. You let your work speak. This is non negotiable for women in business, especially if you're a service provider, a consultant, a creator. If you trade your time, your mind, and your energy for income. Because the market does not reward you for being nice, it rewards clarity and certainty. Let me give you an example. There was a woman I knew. She was a lawyer, very smart, very capable, really good at what she did. But she was always frustrated. She'd say things like, I don't understand why I'm not attracting my dream clients. Well, one day she finally did. A high level client with deep pockets. The call was going great. The client loved her background, loved her approach, and she felt like everything was aligned. Then they got to pricing. And this is where things started to shift. The lawyer shared her rate, and you can feel the energy change. She started justifying the price, over explaining, almost bracing for impact. The client said, "Okay, let me sleep on it and I'll get back to you tomorrow." And of course, she never did. Later, she found out that that same client hired another lawyer in her field. And this lawyer charged 10 times more. And she wasn't necessarily more capable than the other lawyer. And she also didn't have a reputation for being the nicest person. But when the client asked for her price, she stated it confidently, but calm, without justifying, without handing out discounts. And she didn't drag the conversation out. She wasn't trying to be liked. She was leading the interaction. And that, right there, is dark feminine energy in business. She was so sure of herself that the client almost felt silly not doing business with her. And that's the part people miss. When you stop leaking energy, things reorganize. In business, leaking energy looks like giving endless free value, answering emails at 11 o'clock at night, jumping on quick calls that sneakily turn into unpaid strategy sessions, discounting your price the moment someone flinches. When you stop doing these things, people start treating your time and your energy like it's scarce because you finally do. And the more energy you preserve, the more money you will make. So, we've talked about how this energy changes dating, relationships, and your career, but it also completely changes family dynamics. And this part is for a very specific woman. Okay? Where are my first generation American girlies at? Okay, my eldest daughters, especially eldest daughters in first gen households. Please come to the front. Listen, all my life I had to fight. That line was made for us. I don't care what anyone says. But even if your family isn't toxic, okay, but they struggle to respect your boundaries, or they're used to you being the emotional manager, the fixer, the translator, the peacekeeper, sometimes our families struggle to see us as anything other than the little girl we used to be. But it's important that they don't just acknowledge your womanhood, they also need to respect it. And just like in any other relationship, when you start changing how you show up, they will notice. They will say things like, "You've changed. I like how you used to be. Why are you acting weird?" Yes, hearing those things can be uncomfortable. But you want to know what else is uncomfortable? Dreading family gatherings because they don't respect your boundaries. Spending hours on the phone with your mom because she sees you as her therapist, her nurse, her friend, and her daughter all at once. Feeling like your sibling's personal bank because everyone sees you as the reliable one. That discomfort costs you far more. So remember, whenever you feel resistance from your family, that doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. That's actually a good sign. It means what you're doing is working and that the dynamic is changing. And change always feels uncomfortable at first. Practice staying calm, firm, and grounded in who you are without collapsing or over explaining. And once you understand that, everything we've talked about today, dating, career, business, family, starts to make sense as one integrated way of being. So before we close this video out, there's one thing I want to leave you with. Dark feminine energy is comfortable with discomfort because real transformation is not pretty. Burning down an old identity rarely is. An identity, you see, is a living entity and it will fight to the death, okay, to prevent its own death. When you start embodying this energy, something has to die. And that's the older version of you. Yes, that process can feel painful, disorienting even, but it's also powerful. because what comes after is self possession. This work isn't for women who need constant reassurance. It's not for women who avoid discomfort at all costs. And it's not for women who want to be liked by everyone. Because embodying this energy will change how people respond to you. Dark feminine energy is self trust, it's discernment, it's restraint, and it's moving through the world as a woman who knows herself. So, if this resonated with you, there's a lot more we can explore together. I'll be going deeper into things like the femme fatale archetype, other feminine archetypes and how they show up, and how we can channel them, the difference between light and dark feminine energies, and very practical ways to apply this in real life. And if you want to go deeper right now, my book is available on Amazon. I've been told it's less of a book and more of a masterclass. So, if this work speaks to you, that's a good place to start. If this video resonated, let me know in the comments what stood out to you, or comment black hearts if you got to the end of the video. And if you're someone who loves going deep, go ahead and subscribe and make yourself cozy, because we're just getting started.